It was one of those cold, restless autumn weekends when the wind seemed to whisper warnings no one could quite understand. The air felt damp, heavy with the smell of wet leaves and the promise of rain. That weekend, the three of us decided to escape the monotony of the city and head out to the cabin on the island. It wasn't our first trip there. In fact, we had spent countless summer days on that island, laughing, swimming, and fishing off the dock. But this time was different. This time it wasn't summer. The air was colder, sharper, and the island felt off. As we packed up the boat, a thick fog rolled in over the water, swallowing the horizon until even the distant shoreline disappeared. The sea was unusually calm, almost eerily so, like it was holding its breath. The little outboard motor of our boat hummed as we drifted away from the mainland, its sound cutting through the oppressive silence. Around us, the water barely rippled, as if the usual rhythm of waves had been stilled by something unseen. None of us said it out loud, but we all felt it, the unnatural stillness pressed against us. Cabin, as always, stood at the top of a long, rickety staircase that climbed up from the dock. It was old, the kind of place that creaked and groaned in protest with every step, as though the wood itself remembered every storm that had ever battered it. The dock was no better. Swayed slightly under our weight, its weathered boards groaning as if to warn us away. The cabin's nearest neighbor was 100 meters down the coast, but they were rarely there. Beyond that, the rest of the island was wild and untouched. It was the kind of place where you could go days without seeing another soul, something that, under normal circumstances, we would have loved. But tonight, that isolation felt less like a comfort and more like a threat. We unloaded our gear, settled into the cabin, and decided to fish off the dock before the light faded completely. The wind had picked up, tugging at our jackets and carrying with it a damp chill that seemed to seep into our bones. As we cast our lines into the still water, the fog thickened, wrapping around us like a living thing. It was then we saw it, a shape floating on the water about 20 meters out. First, we thought it was just debris, maybe a buoy or a ball someone had lost to the tide. But as it drifted closer, we realized it wasn't either of those things. "Is that hair?" one of us muttered, his voice barely audible over the wind. The three of us leaned closer, squinting against the fog. It did look like hair, long and dark, tangled around the edges of the object. A bird swooped down, landed on it briefly, then flew away. The thing bobbed on the surface, its movements unnervingly slow and deliberate, as though it were being guided by an unseen hand. And then, in the pale light of the rising moon, we saw it, a face. It wasn't clear at first, just a vague, pale shape beneath the water. But as it drifted even closer, the details sharpened, and what we saw made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It was a face, pale and lifeless, its features frozen in an expression of sheer, unrelenting terror. The eyes, wide open and unblinking, seemed to stare directly at us, as though pleading for help. Or maybe warning us to leave. We backed away from the edge of the dock, hearts pounding. "It's just a trick of the light," I said, though my voice trembled. "The moon, the water. It's playing tricks on us." No one responded. We all knew it wasn't the moon. The face lingered there, bobbing gently on the waves until the fog swallowed it again. We stood in silence, the weight of what we'd just seen pressing down on us like a physical force. Finally, someone suggested we go inside, and no one argued. The warmth of the cabin should have been comforting, but instead it felt stifling. The windows, thin and drafty, let in the sound of the wind, which had grown stronger, howling through the trees like a living thing. We tried to distract ourselves with a card game, but none of us could focus. Every few minutes, one of us would glance out the kitchen window, which faced the dock, as if expecting to see that face again. At some point, the object, or whatever it was, disappeared. None of us saw it leave, but when we looked, it was gone. For a moment, relief washed over us. But then came the dread. If it wasn't in the water, Where was it? By the time we went to bed, the tension in the cabin was unbearable. None of us spoke much, and when we did, it was in hushed whispers, as though speaking louder might summon something. I lay awake for hours, staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling, every creak of the old cabin setting my nerves on edge. Then the footsteps began. First, I thought I was imagining it, a faint, rhythmic sound barely audible over the wind. But as I strained to listen, the sound grew louder, more distinct. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving along the dock. "Do you hear that?" one of my friends whispered from the other bed. I nodded, though I wasn't sure he could see me in the dark. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, as though whatever was out there wanted us to know it was coming. Then they stopped. For a moment there was silence. And then the creak of the stairs. Each step groaned under the weight of something heavy, something that climbed with an unhurried, almost casual purpose. My heart hammered in my chest as the steps grew closer and closer. When the final step creaked, we froze. Whatever it was had reached the top. And then, slowly, the sound of shuffling footsteps moved toward the window. We didn't dare move. I held my breath, my eyes fixed on the thin curtains covering the glass. Then, in the faint light of the moon, I saw it, a shadow, long and distorted, stretching across the floor. Whatever it was tall. Unnaturally tall. And then it moved. The shadow shifted, rising higher until it blocked the light entirely. Something pressed against the window, something I couldn't see clearly but could feel. The weight of its presence was unbearable. The glass groaned under the pressure, and I thought it might shatter. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The silence that followed was suffocating. We lay there, paralyzed, until we heard it again, the heavy footsteps, this time moving away, descending the stairs. When the final sound, a loud splash, echoed through the night, we knew we weren't alone. We left before dawn, abandoning the cabin without a second thought. None of us looked back as the boat pulled away from the dock. Later, in the safety of the car, one of my friends finally spoke. He told us that in the brief moment he had dared to look at the window, he saw the face again, the same face from the water, staring back at him. Only this time it wasn't alone. We've never returned to that cabin. We never will.